Hi there, I'm Sam, and I was park ranger for 6 years. I won't specify where as I don't want to get in trouble. One of the people I worked with told me to read the other park ranger stories on here, so I thought I'd give it a shot. And shit, is it good to see someone being honest? It inspired me to share some of my own stories. People need to know what happens in the woods. I quit my job a couple years ago. I couldn't deal with having to bottle up all the things I've seen. Nobody wants to talk about them, but I feel I'm drowning in the memories of it all. So I'm going to share them. I don't know if I'll be able to share it all. It might be too hard, but I'll give it a go. I hope this raises some awareness of the true danger of the woods and make people consider their safety. I don't want people to think I'm copying someone or making these things up. I'm just sharing my stories and experiences. Let's get into it. This was my first ever weird experience as a junior ranger. To this day, I still don't know what I saw, but I know it wasn't friendly. I had just received a call about screams coming from deeper in the forest off one of the more popular trails. This really wasn't unusual. If you've heard a mountain lion, you know it sounds like a woman screaming. So just as I was about to set off, my chief at the time asked to come along. I found this a little odd, as the job seemed a bit too insignificant for his rank, but I brushed it off as I was new and thought maybe he wanted to check my progress. We set off making small talk, and I was obviously trying to suck up a little. We were joking around. He made a quick remark and said something about making sure that I take even these small jobs seriously, because you'll never know what you'll find. And that was some of the most valuable advice I've gotten from someone on this job, because I learned my lesson from not listening to it. But that's a different story. We get to the area where the call was and begin north of the trail where the noise had been heard. We hear the screams, and it sounds like a mountain lion, but something sounds really off about it, but we keep walking towards it. We're about 10 minutes into walking towards the sound when all of a sudden it's like all the sound had been sucked from the woods. It was dead silent. I couldn't even hear my breathing. I thought maybe I'd gone deaf, but I look at my chief, and he had the same nervous expression on his face as I did. But by the way he was reacting, it felt as if he had dealt with something similar before, which I now know to be true. Just as quick as the silence came, I started to hear this low buzzing, but it wasn't just buzzing. I could feel the vibration of it in the whole body, so much so that my ears and jaws started to hurt. I can only describe it as if when you are getting your teeth drilled in at the dentist, but it felt even worse. Even my vision started to vibrate, and as that happened, I swear this black figure about 7 feet tall stepped out from a few trees in front of me and started with that same scream as it bent down and began to crawl towards us. As anyone would, I freak the fuck out and step back to start running. My chief grabs my arm very hard, just as I start to sprint, almost knocking me over. He puts his other arm around me and holds my arms very tight as he begins to walk me out of the forest. Just as I'm about to put up a fight and tell him to fucking run, he says in a very calm voice, "Don't run, don't talk, don't look back, just keep walking." And I did exactly what he said. He knew something I didn't, and as much as I wanted to run, I didn't want to test the theory of death. That 10-minute walk was excruciating because I knew it was crawling behind us by the buzzing in the back of my head and the sound of wailing. It's light wailing. I wanted to run so bad. Eventually, I think it ran off because all the noise in the forest came back and the buzzing stopped. We get back on the trail, and I'm shaking. I was in so much shock I couldn't even cry. He lets go of me and begins walking back to main base without acknowledging what happened. I start going crazy and screaming at him, asking what the hell that was, and he says, and yes, I remember word for word what he said. There are things in these woods that have been here longer than us that we can't explain or get rid of. If you don't think you can handle that, you should pack your bags now. He kept walking, and I walked a bit behind, trying to shake that horrible feeling and tried to find a reasonable answer for what just happened. I clearly stayed in the job. When it was good, it was really good. I met some amazing people, and I love nature, but in the end, the bad experiences outweighed the good, and I had to leave. I wish I had left when he told me to pack my bags, in all honesty. I know this experience doesn't sound all that scary, but trust me, there are worse ones. Living through it was definitely much scarier than reading it in words. Clearly, this first encounter wasn't enough to scare me off, but the ones to come led to my departure of this job. Some experiences are scarier, but some are more explainable. I'm still debating whether to share the rest of my stories. Maybe I'll see how I feel after posting this. I'd love to hear other people's experiences with the woods. If you're new here, hi, I'm Samantha Sam, and I used to be a national park ranger. This is part 2. I'm sure you can find part 1 if you go on my page or look around for it. I don't know. A lot of people seem to be interested in the stairs found in the woods. Let me just start by saying that I have seen a set of stairs in the woods once, and personally, it wasn't all too scary, just a bit creepy. I know a couple of my friends back in the force, a force to be reckoned with, have some stories about stairs, ones that they've mentioned in minor detail, but I want to share my experience first, and when and if I decide to contact them and get their permission, maybe I'll post about it. I do, however, have a story about a ladder that I wish I could forget, as just thinking about it gives me the creeps. My experience with stairs is pretty tame, so I'll add another incident after it. We were doing a search for a young girl who had wandered off. We found her. She's fine. The team was stretched out pretty far, so I was walking by myself, but was in shouting distance of people. As I was walking, I found a set of stairs. These stairs sort of looked like they belonged here, but also didn't. They seemed overgrown, and like they would have been the steps up to someone's house. But then I realized that there is no way someone could have put these here, and that I had come across a set of the stairs that my other coworkers had touched upon. I thought I'd feel more terrified if I ever came across a pair, but I really didn't. I had this urge to walk up them, though, like something was pulling my body towards them. Maybe it was excitement of coming across the phenomenon or some dark shit at work, I don't know. Someone near me called that they had found something, and I was snapped back to reality. I'm really glad someone called out. I'm not sure if I would have walked up them otherwise. We found the girl and all was well. But on the walk back, I told one of my partners that I had seen some stairs. She looked at me concerned and kind of aggressively interrogated me to know if I touched or walked up them. I said no, and that was it. So yeah, pretty tame, nothing too intense. Wish I had more to say about them, but I'm not gonna lie or overemphasize anything on here. This next occurrence isn't about stairs, but it is about a ladder, and I'd say they're pretty similar. This was somewhere into my first year as a national park ranger, and around the start of summer, poison ivy tends to get pretty crazy. So we have to do weekly checks on the trails and the bush surrounding them. My partner and I get sent off to check some of the less popular trails. We get to this part on a smaller trail where it forks off for a couple minutes and then joins back at the end. Being the idiots we were, we split to then meet back up where it connects again. Keep in mind we could make each out from the bush that sits in the middle of the path. No biggie, right? He takes the left, and I take the right of the trail. As I'm walking along the path, keeping a cautious eye at the surrounding bush looking for some ivy, I noticed something in the corner of my eye. I looked to my right to see this large clearing in the middle of the trees. It looked like a man-made circle. It was so perfectly round as if someone had been maintaining it. There wasn't a tree, not a bush, not even a weed. I was so focused on the ground and lack of flora, I almost didn't notice the giant unmissable ladder. I clearly didn't have great observational skills, standing exactly in the middle of the circle. I seriously cannot explain this, but the ladder was standing up, right leaning against nothing. It was like some unknown force was holding it up. I looked all the way up and saw on top stood a man in a business suit. I know this sounds almost funny, but this guy looked like he had just walked straight out of a corporate building. Upon further inspection, I could see that his head was hanging back, looking up towards the sky. His mouth appeared to be gaped open, but I couldn't get a good look. I called up to him a few times, but no response. I walked around the ladder trying to find some strings attached to it in hopes this was some prank or a weird art project, but I couldn't. This guy looked like he was on display for some art exhibition. I didn't know what to do, and I couldn't see my partner through the bushes, so I radioed him to come to my location. But in the meantime, I stupidly decided to touch the ladder. I know you're all probably mad that I went to touch the ladder. I am too. Don't touch weird shit you find in the woods, but I was still new and naive. I get this weird feeling just as I'm about to touch the ladder, but I brush it off as just being spooked and I touch it. The man at the top snaps his neck in this disturbingly contorted way to look towards me and gives out this ungodly gasp, like he was taking his last breath of air. His expression is still gaped, but I've never seen something quite like this. It was like his eyelids and lips had been pulled back to make him seem more surprised. I stepped back, of course, and grabbed my taser from my side. I heard rustling behind me and turned to stick my taser on whatever coming for me, but it was just my partner emerging from the bush who put his hands up quickly in hopes to not be tased. I look back to the circle and the ladder is now flat on the floor and the man is gone. My partner asked what was going on, and I explained what happened and begged him to not think I was crazy. Of course, he didn't think that. He knew just as well as I did that this stuff was basically normal and happened all the time. We knew we wouldn't find this guy, but it's still protocol to look anyway, which I didn't enjoy one bit. I was praying we wouldn't find him. Never saw something like this again, and neither has anyone I've ever talked to. I mean, this guy was balancing on the very top of a ladder that wasn't leaning against anything. Who knows, maybe I met Houdini or something. When you see things like this, you have to make some sort of joke about it, or you won't be able to move past it. I'm really glad people are enjoying what I have to say. Again, don't know when I'll write more. Don't expect too much from me. This is kind of tiring, but also pretty cathartic. I'm thinking of also sharing some of the less spooky stories, and one that are just humans being mental. Your dad's the only person that ever killed one of them. I sank back into the sofa, coffee cooling and forgotten as I processed the old guide's words. Then I said, "Tell me." And in his slow, careful croak of a drawl, he did. Your old man and I were both members of the National Park Service Investigative Services Branch. If you ask 100 people, 99 don't know. The parks have their own little FBI. But they do, and you can imagine what that job entailed. One day in the dead heat of summer, a call comes through the Washington office. A kid went missing in Mammoth Cave. Something didn't smell right, and they wanted one of our boys on it. So a couple hours later, the two of us find ourselves driving a banged-up Park Service cop car through the Kentucky woods with our sirens blaring. When we got to the cave entrance, the ranger in charge, a big hulk of a guy, met us out front. That place is eerie during the best of times, but that day was another story. There's this long concrete staircase that cuts down the hill into the mouth of the cave. Now, stairs in the woods are always a bad sign, but they look almost like the ground is swallowing the steps whole. On top of that, the place was crawling with rangers, and the entire scene gave me a bad feeling. "What did they tell you?" the big guy asks us, cutting right to the chase. Truth was, not much, so he filled us in. Robbie Abbott, 6 years old. He's on summer vacation, and his parents take him for a tour of the caves. He pointed to a young couple, sitting on the stairs, all huddled together. The Abbotts go in around 10 a.m. At 11:10 a.m., Mrs. Abbott comes out panicked. She flags down the nearest ranger and tells him their boy went missing, and that Mr. Abbott is still inside looking for him. Ranger goes in at 11:15, comes out with Mr. Abbott, but no sign of the kid. Eventually, Mr. and Mrs. calm down, but it took a while. Once they start giving details, things stop adding up. According to the Abbotts, they were in a side cave, just off the main path, and Mr. Abbott was holding little Robbie's hand. He turns to Mrs. Abbott, and while the two of them are chatting, he lets go for a minute. They turn back, and little Robbie is gone, no trace, like he melted right into the rocks. By the time he got done talking, I could tell the Abbotts were listening in. So we thanked the big ranger and went over to the couple. The two of them seemed pretty broken up. They told us near exactly the same story they'd given the big guy. After going down a side path, the kid lets go of Mr. Abbott's hand, then he's gone without a trace. But the mom mentioned that their boy was wearing his brand new pair of red light-up shoes, which the ranger hadn't mentioned. Your dad and I talked privately for a minute. We agreed something seemed funny, but we decided to ask if they could show us the place where it happened. When we asked the couple, Mr. Abbott put on a brave face and says, "I'll go." And the big ranger agreed to let him show us the spot, but he insisted on coming with us as well, to make sure we didn't get ourselves lost. So we each took a lantern, and on the four of us went down that staircase and into the cave. The guide paused here for a moment and sighed heavily. Then he stood and crossed the small living room to a corner cabinet. After rustling inside for a moment, he came away with a tall amber bottle. Still silent, he poured a few swallows of the stuff into his coffee, then returned, liquor in hand, to his place on the chair. He offered me the bottle. I was still cold to my bones from my trip to Isle Royale, so I accepted and poured a bit into my own mug. Then the old man continued. I said earlier that the mouth of that cave is eerie in the best of times. Well, these weren't the best of times. The entrance looks like a big black hole in the earth, and it always seems to be dripping, even on a clear summer day like that one. It's also cool down there, chilly even. And for whatever reason, there's always a breeze blowing out of the cave, not into it. So when we went down those stairs, into the earth, I had this creeping sensation like I was walking into my own grave. Once we got inside, Abbott and the ranger led us at a quick march through the caves. We took a right out of the entrance and ended up in a cavern so big they built a staircase in it. Thing goes back and forth in a zigzag 4 or 5 times. They call it the tower. The entryway and a lot of the more developed areas are hung with these electric lights. So the tower is lit up like the front, but gets darker as you go down. We took a left off of that staircase, but after that, I can't tell you where we went. I did my best to keep track, but I figured we had the lead guy with us, and he knew his way around. After a while, maybe 20-30 minutes of walking, Mr. Abbott stopped us and says, "It was here." The electricity had ended a few turns prior, so we only had light from our lanterns. Cave dark is a different kind of dark. Usually you can see outlines and movement. Down there under the rocks, it presses in on you like it's a living thing. So it seemed awfully strange that someone would bring their kid down one of these back. Then, after your dad asked the question, he turned back around and held his lantern up high, and Abbott got right up behind him, inches away. I can still see the picture, clear as I'm seeing you. The man had gone pale, ghost white, and his eyes. Some animals have this reflective layer behind their eyeballs. It's why you can see a cat's eyes in the dark, but humans don't have it. It's why you get red eye in a camera flash. There's nothing behind our eyeballs, so the light goes right through, and you can actually see the capillaries and the blood. But when your dad held up that lantern, Abbott's eyes flashed yellow-green, like an animal's. My stomach dropped. But before I could say anything to your old man, or even tell Abbott to back up, we heard something echoing around the cave. I shushed everyone, and we all waited, silent and huddled around. Then we heard it again. It was more clear the second time. "Hello?" It was a high, panicked shout, like a lost little kid. It had to be Robbie. I'd all but forgotten about Abbott and his creepy eyes, so I called back. "Robbie?" I yelled. "Robbie, we're here to help you. Who's there?" The voice called out again, excited but still scared. "Robbie," I tell him, "we're park rangers. Your dad is here with us." I nudged Abbott and he called out too. He says, "Robbie, it's Dad. We're gonna come get you. Keep yelling and stay where you are." And the four of us went deeper into the caves, following that voice. After a bit, through dark in the distance, I spotted a pair of blinking, flashing red lights, just a few inches off the ground, like a little kid's light-up shoes. The four of us dashed toward them, into the dark, but they kept getting further away, like Robbie was running. We kept calling, though, and he kept answering them. The ranger and Abbott got ahead of us. Abbott couldn't be slowed, and the ranger kept up with him. Your dad and I fell a bit behind as the two of them turned a sharp corner ahead of us. The tunnel had gotten tighter. We had to go one by one now, and the both of us were crouching down. But when we rounded the bend, we came right up on a big pile of rocks in our way. There was only a small gap, set a bit off of the ground, and we'd have to go through at an angle. I held up my lantern, but couldn't see much past the rocks. We called out, and the ranger's voice answered. Through there, I tried to picture a big guy like him squeezing through that tiny gap, but I figured he had plenty of experience in the caves and didn't think much more about it. Then your dad says to me, "I'll go first." He didn't wait for me to agree. He just started climbing, and before I knew it, he'd squeezed right through that gap. I waited a beat. Then, from the other side, he gave a shout, and I heard a clatter of rocks. I rushed to squeeze through after him and climbed up the rocks. I got my head and shoulder into the gap, then tried to use my feet to push the rest of my body through after. I wasn't sure I was going to make it, and for a minute I was properly stuck. My heart started going as the rocks felt like they were squeezing me. But after a beat, my uniform shifted and I got through. It took me a moment to get my bearings on the other side. I held up my lantern, and the cavern was so big I couldn't see the walls. I thought I heard the rush of water somewhere nearby, but I can't be sure. Your dad was just ahead of the gap, and he had his lantern held up high. But he was just standing there. "Danny," I said to him. "What's going on? Do we have the kid?" He didn't answer. He was looking at something on the ground. So I came up next to him, and I saw what he was looking at. It makes my stomach churn just thinking about it. On the ground was the ranger, or parts of him. The only word I can think of to describe that mess was a pile. The ranger was in a wet, shredded pile on the cave floor, and on top of that pile, stacked neatly almost, was a pair of blinking red light-up shoes. There was no sign of Abbott. I stopped and stood next to your dad and just stared for a minute, until a voice interrupted us, over here. It was the kid's voice again, but it echoed and bounced off the walls of the cavern so loud that I couldn't tell where it came from. Then again, but a different voice, "Smar. We're over here. Mr. Abbott's this time." I stepped deeper into the cave and pulled my flashlight from my belt, and I shined it all around that cave. Your dad made like he was going to answer, but I stopped him because my light hit something moving by the cave wall. I tried to follow it, but it lost me. Your dad kept his lantern up in one hand and pulled his own flashlight out in the other. He shined it all around the cave too. And then two things happened, one right after the other. First, the kid's voice called out again, "Hello?" And second, my light found what that voice came from. And it sure as hell wasn't Robbie Abbott. Clinging to the wall high up in the cavern was a pale white thing. Its body was long, shapeless, and fleshy, like some kind of overgrown maggot. It hung onto the wall with four thin, double-jointed arms that stuck to the rocks with these long, almost human fingers. And its face. It had two beady little black eyes on either side of a big round head. And in between them were two long, jagged slits. Nostrils, I assume. But most of that head was mouth. A giant mouth filled with needles for teeth. And when I shined my light over its eyes, they flashed, yellow-green like an animal. And when it opened that mouth, Robbie's voice came out again and said, "Who's there?" I froze, and all I could do was stare, until another voice from somewhere else in the cave called out, over here in Mr. Abbott's voice, and then another, through there in the ranger's. Then a chorus of voices sounded from all around us, louder and louder, echoing off the walls. I heard the ranger, I heard Mr. Abbott, I heard little Robbie. Then I heard a woman shrieking loudly, "Where's my son?" And I heard the heaving sobs of a little kid. And I heard all three of those voices screaming, crying, and screeching through the caves like they were being torn apart. That was enough for me. I shouted at your dad, told him to go, and he did. I'd gone a little deeper into the cavern when I was shining my light around, and your dad was closer to the gap we'd come through. He bolted toward it, and around us, the skittering crawl of fingers against rock seemed to come from every direction as those awful voices echoed and bounced off the walls. Your dad squeezed through the gap, and I followed after. I climbed up, and again I got my head and shoulders through, but I couldn't get my chest or my midsection past those rocks. I pushed off the walls again, but I couldn't get a good enough angle. The skittering sound and those echoing voices seemed like they were right behind me, and again the rocks felt like they were crushing me down. But your dad got a hold of my vest, and he yanked me right through. Just when I felt the brush of fingers against my ankles, the both of us have took off. I couldn't for the life of me remember where we'd come from, but your dad did. And we flew through those caves, all while that skittering sound and those wailing voices followed us, just on our heels. We reached the tower, and the both of us took the stairs 2 at a time. When we reached the entrance, I was breathing heavy, and whatever had chased seemed to be gone. I stopped, and for a second I looked back into the cave, and I could swear I saw a pair of flashing yellow-green eyes right behind us. But I turned back around, and by then, your dad was already out of the cave and halfway to Mrs. Abbott. He says to her, "Ma'am, for your safety, you have to come with us." She protested, of course, asked where her husband was, where her son was, but your dad stayed quiet, and all he would say is, "Please come this way," while he marched her to the car and put her in the back. I wasn't quite sure what he was thinking, but I knew that I trusted your dad. And so I got in the passenger seat while he threw on the sirens, and we hightailed out of the park. Once we got going, she kept firing questions at us from back there. "Where are you taking me? Where's my husband? Where's my boy?" And we couldn't answer. But when we got close to the exit, with the ranger booth in the distance, she really started to lose it. She started screeching, started wailing. I tried to tell her to keep calm, that everything was going to be okay. By now, we were going about 60. And when I turned around, what I saw was not a scared mother. She'd gone pale, just like her husband had in the cave, and her neck seemed too long now, and she started thrashing and kicking at the window, and her voice started to change too. First it was her own, scared mother routine, then the quiet, heaving sobs of a lost little kid, then the angry shout of a grown man, and then, just as we were about to cross out of the park, with some animal strength that I have never seen anywhere else, she kicked right through the safety glass cop car window and launched herself out. Your dad slammed on the brakes, and I damn near went through the windshield. She landed a few yards away. Your dad sprinted over to her, and I scrambled to unbuckle my seatbelt and follow him. By the time I got there, the two of them were wrestling on the ground. Her mouth had gotten twice the size of a human's, and those teeth had gone needly sharp. And the two of them were rolling on the asphalt, her kicking, screaming, snapping those jaws, and him huffing to wrestle her down. She got her teeth into him, bit him real bad on the shoulder right near his throat. But your dad hauled that thing to the ranger's booth, and she fought him for every inch. And by the time he got her there, she'd gone all the way back to one of those fleshy, maggoty things we'd seen down there underground. But he dragged her over the edge of the park, just by a bit. And when he did, that thing stopped dead still, and let out this awful, high-piercing wail, somewhere between a bobcat scream and metal scraping down an old chalkboard. Then, like a plant dying in double time, she withered to a brown, shriveled-up husk. Then a breeze blew in, and she floated away like dust in the wind. We got your dad fixed up. Then we called our office that afternoon, and your dad told him everything that happened, every word. The Abbotts never turned up. But I can guarantee there wasn't a thing about it in the news. And if you ask around, nobody's going to tell you a thing. The guide let this final line trail off into a whisper. He'd barely moved throughout the story, but when he finished, he sunk into the chair, deflated, as if the tale had drained him of some essential life energy. Finally, after a long pause, we locked eyes, and in his dry croak, voice nearly gone, the old man finished. "You want to know why those things come after you?" He took a final sip of his coffee. "Your dad dragged one of them, kicking and screaming out of the parks with his bare hands. And I don't think they can just forget about that." This is how the human mind works. When you're walking through a forest, you don't think too much. You just let the silence surround you, feel the soft breeze and the branches crack under your feet. It's in our nature to yearn for such scenery. No matter how much we thrive in busy, concrete-soaked cities, forests are always welcoming and refreshing to us. The air is clear and crisp, and daylight plays hide and seek through the tall branches. It's inspiring and beautiful. Sometimes, though, as you walk on your path, your mind begins to focus on small things. Noises, gusts of wind, shadows in the trees. Such silence can be both welcoming and unsettling, depends on how you view it. Forests are double-sided coins. They hide you away from the tiring city landscape, but expose you to another environment. You're not in control anymore, because this is not your home. You can lie to yourself and build a house there, but you don't belong in a forest. You're merely a visitor. That's national parks for you, an illusion of being in control. The fake freedom you feel when you walk on those marked paths and camp in the square assigned to you, when you think the silence around you is peaceful, but even the silence is an illusion. Visit a forest again. Even when it's silent, is it really? It's not. Complete, absolute silence means death. Fear it. My father taught me that. He's a park ranger, and he's been doing this job since forever. I wasn't much of a fan of national parks, especially because most of the time there's no service, and the hikes are killing me. I'd rather enjoy nature by swimming in a lake or skiing. Why break your legs to end up to a high point just to see a random valley? Not to mention the animals. They were everywhere, and the insects always got on my nerves. I never understood his love for the forest. I guess that was one of the reasons why he started telling me scary stories from his night shift. Looking back, they were obviously made up, but to younger me, they seemed believable. I used to think he was so brave for working the night shift. As I got older, I got into horror, and even if I didn't believe in his forest creatures anymore, I still liked the idea of spending the night in a small cabin in the middle of nowhere, just for that dose of adrenaline. When my father said he wanted to take me with him, I accepted immediately. I knew why he offered. See, over the past years, our relationship had taken a big hit. I guess I was growing up and he didn't know how to handle that. He'd become emotionally distant and seemed to repel any of my tries to open up to him. In return, I'd become uninterested and irritable. In the words of my mother, this would have been a fun way to bond, I guess. We arrived at the park around 9 p.m. His shift started at 10 p.m. and ended at 6 a.m. His Jeep pierced through the darkness and ventured into the woods. The headlights flashed the trees, turning them white against the black sky. I'd never been on this route, but, again, my visits to the park were rare. We drove for a while. Most of the time, people underestimate the size of national parks. It took us an hour and a half to get to the cabin, which wasn't even in the heart of the forest. I saw it, one single trace of humanity in the middle of nowhere. A tiny, wooden cabin with flickering light bulbs and watchdogs. Before we got out of the car, my father stopped me. Listen, there's some instructions you need to follow here. I know it might seem unimportant, but they're crucial. Then he handed me a piece of paper. A list of handwritten rules. At first, they were ordinary. Don't go out alone in the park, don't leave food out, etc. I thought the rest of the rules had been put there just to freak me out. Dad, I'm not 12 anymore. You can't freak me out with this shit. I'm not trying to. You wanted to come here with me, so act accordingly. What even is this? If you see a man without an arm, don't help him. We have all kinds of weirdos around here. And this, if the whistling is near you, it means they're far? My father smiled, but his eyes didn't. Some of these are added by superstitious fellas. It's more of a what if, it's not going to happen to you. 1. Don't go out alone in the park. Always have a working contact device. 2. Don't leave marked paths unless instructed to and/or with proper equipment. 3. Don't leave food out and lock the trash bins. 4. Always keep on the whistle and the badge. 5. If you see a man without an arm, don't help him. 6. Your family is not in here. Remember, there is no reason for you to hear their voices from outside. 7. Lock your car doors even when you are driving. 8. Check the marks on the trees. There's only 3 types of marks, all triangles, red, yellow, and green. Other marks are not ours. Don't follow them. 9. If the whistling is near you, it means they're far. If it's far away, it means they're near. 10. Beware of dead blue. What is dead blue? I asked. My father sighed. You know when you're out in the woods, when you think what you hear is silence, but you realize there's dozens of sounds around you, from birds to crickets to leaves rustling? Yeah. That's because there's no such thing as silence, absolute silence. Never. There's always sound, movement, life. Dead blue is complete and utter silence. That's our, code name for it. Death-inducing silence. Unnatural. Right. And when that happens, it won't. But if it does? He paused, staring at the steering wheel. Then his head turned to me. His eyes darted from mine to the window behind me. You leave. That being said, he got out of the car and I followed. The cabin was dusty and cramped. I couldn't understand how he could spend 8 hours in here. He had a small TV, but it wasn't working, a desk and a mini fridge. You sit here all alone? I asked. Yeah, why that freak you out? Don't you get bored? Martin's post is 10 minutes away. Sometimes I just drive over. Nothing really happens out here anyway. My spot is pretty far from the campsites. I just have to patrol from time to time to make sure no one wanders off into the night, but that rarely happens. This is one of the wilder areas, less explored. You haven't explored it all? His eyes sparkled. Wouldn't be possible. So you don't know what's out there? That's the fun of it. You said you wanted adrenaline. There you go. I nodded. He opened the mini fridge and threw me some juice. Orange juice. I'd mentioned I liked this brand once and he'd remembered. Maybe our relationship wasn't so bad. We sat next to each other in the small cabin. Dad locked it. I'm not gonna lie to you, most of the time I just sleep. Literally nothing ever happens. So you really didn't see any creatures out there like the ones you told me about when I was little? I jokingly asked. The only creature out there is my manager, and I'd rather face a million cryptids than talk to him. I laughed. I leaned in to look out the windows. I can't see anything, just my reflection. Want me to dim down the light? Yeah. He did, and darkness crept inside the tiny cabin. The woods became more prominent, more vivid. The light made by the moon was unbelievable, and the stars were actually visible compared to the polluted city. The cabin was on a hill, propped up a tree, with a trapdoor and a ladder leading to our car. We could actually see above the tree line, into the valley. We spent the first hours talking. Somewhere around midnight, I began dozing off. I didn't want to, but I caved in and fell asleep with my head on the desk. He woke me up. I rubbed my eyes in confusion. What time is it? I got a call from Martin. Right. Who? Was Martin? I mumbled. The other one in the area. He says he got a call from the campsite and someone's missing. We need to go search for him. We? As in us? Yeah. You'll stay in the back seat. I'm on the phone with Martin right now. I could hear Martin's muffled voice through the speaker. Wait, don't take the kid. Why not? He'll stay in the car. Paul, it could be one of those nights. We won't get out of the car. You can't guarantee that. Well, I can't leave him here. Alone. In the dark. A pause followed. Look, Paul, I understand you wanted to do a take your kid to work day, but I don't know about this one. It could be dangerous. We're literally just going to drive around for a bit. It's fine. Leave him in the cabin. Dad put his hand over one of the speakers, so I didn't understand what Martin told him. His eyes kept darting to the window behind me. He sighed. Martin will come pick me up. You are staying here. Locked. Turn the lights off and wait for me to return. It's going to take a minute, and you'll be safe here. What? I'm not staying here alone. What did Martin tell you to change your mind? It doesn't matter. I'll return in maximum half an hour. You can go back to sleep if you want, or I can call you and we can talk. I was afraid, truly afraid. I did not want to show it, especially after I'd complained that nothing interesting happened around there, so I reluctantly agreed. My dad opened the trapdoor and climbed down the ladder, then his face disappeared into the darkness. I saw Martin's car pick him up and drive away. Silence followed. I wished I'd been home, in my bed. Instead, I sat stiff on the chair and waited and waited. I began imagining the worst. What if they'd crashed? What if a bear had found them? I didn't want to let my fear get the best of me, but I thought about his legends and the set of rules. I hoped the writers were just paranoid. At around 2 a.m., I heard a knock on the trapdoor. I felt my chest tighten. Another knock followed. I wanted to respond, but something in me didn't allow me to. Then I heard my dad's voice. Kev, open. It's cold out here. It echoed through the cabin. My eyes were dry from the lack of sleep, but my mind was fully awake. I stared at the phone, then at the trapdoor. Kev, open, please. I know you're there. I saw you at the window. I turned off the light completely. I don't know why I had this urge, but if my dad could see me from the window, anyone could. Or anything. And I didn't like to be on display like that. You don't have a key? It locks from the inside. Shit, yeah. How was it? Did you find him? Yeah, we did. He was drunk off his ass. We helped him return to his friends. Could have been a lot worse. As I was talking to him, I searched for the keys in the drawer. It was strange because I hadn't heard anyone climbing the ladder or seen Martin's car drive my dad back to the cabin. How did you get here without Martin? What do you mean? Open up, Kev. I'm freezing. Answer the question. He did drive me here. Didn't see any headlights. They were off to not draw the attention of animals. Bullshit. I pulled out the crumpled piece of paper. 6. Your family is not in here. Remember, there's no reason for you to hear their voices from outside. My hand was shaking so bad I could barely grab the phone. I skimmed through my contacts. Kate F. Connor. Dad, I called him. The phone was ringing, yet no sound came from beneath the trapdoor. My dad picked up. Anything okay? In the blinding darkness of the cabin, surrounded by the howling wind, I toned my voice down to a whisper. Dad, someone out there is pretending to be you. A long pause followed. When he spoke, his voice was trembling. Don't open. Turn off the lights. Did you turn them off when I told you? I turned them off now. No, you should have turned them off when I left. I'm sorry. It's fine. Don't talk to it. Did you talk to it? Guilt crept up my spine. I don't know why, but I lied. I did not. Good, stay put. I'm coming after you. But what if the thing sees you? You'll have to face it. We have ways to distract them. It's fine. Don't be scared. I lied again. I'm not. Good. I love you. I'm coming. I wasn't scared for me. I was scared for him. The voice from below continued. Kev, please open. Please. It's cold. I didn't answer. Knocks followed. The voice went on. Did you talk to someone on the phone? Kev, I lost my phone in the woods. Whoever is out there and has my phone is not me. It's not me. It's not me. It kept repeating, it's not me. It's not me. I began feeling lightheaded. Fear is one thing, but this was a combination of anxiety, stress, and guilt. I tried to control my breaths, but to no avail. The cabin was spinning around me. It's not 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 me. Shut up. Shut up. And it did. Silence followed. I pulled out the list again and started reading and rereading the rules like a lunatic. I kept listening for noises from outside. The wind was still going. Good. No dead blue. Then I heard a loud thud from my wall. Another followed, and another. It sounded like footsteps. They moved to the roof of the cabin. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. Whatever was out there was now climbing around my cabin. I could hear the scratching outside. I started to cry and covered my mouth with my hand. I just wanted my dad. I wished I could see his face again. The universe, somehow, ironically responded because my dad's face suddenly appeared at one of the windows. He raised his hand and knocked. I stared at him through my eyebrows, my head tilted. Scarcely breathing, I remained still. He kept knocking. That wasn't my dad. The cabin was tied to a tree at around 10 meters from the ground. He could not be at the window. The creature knocked, and for what seemed like an eternity, we just made eye contact. Blood was dripping from one of its nostrils. Another phone call woke me from my trance. Kevin, are you there? Are you in the cabin? Yes, and the thing looks like you, and it's at the window. I'm coming right now. I'll shoot it. Don't worry, I'm just about to turn a corner. Dad, I'm really scared for you. Martin's coming too. It's okay. A long pause followed. When he spoke, his voice was trembling. Don't open. Turn off the lights. Did you turn them off when I told you? I turned them off now. No, you should have turned them off when I left. I'm sorry. It's fine. Don't talk to it. Did you talk to it? Guilt crept up my spine. I don't know why, but I lied. I did not. Good, stay put. I'm coming after you. But what if the thing sees you? You'll have to face it. We have ways to distract them. It's fine. Don't be scared. I lied again. I'm not. Good, I love you. I'm coming. I wasn't scared for me. I was scared for him. The voice from below continued. Kev, please open. Please. It's cold. I didn't answer. Knocks followed. The voice went on. Did you talk to someone on the phone? Kev, I lost my phone in the woods. Whoever is out there and has my phone is not me. It's not me. It's not me. It kept repeating, it's not me. It's not me. I began feeling lightheaded. Fear is one thing, but this was a combination of anxiety, stress, and guilt. I tried to control my breaths, but to no avail. The cabin was spinning around me. It's not me, 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 it's not me. Shut up. Shut up. And it did. Silence followed. I pulled out the list again and started reading and rereading the rules like a lunatic. I kept listening for noises from outside. The wind was still going. Good. No dead blue. Then I heard a loud thud from my wall. Another followed, and another. It sounded like footsteps. They moved to the roof of the cabin. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. Whatever was out there was now climbing around my cabin. I could hear the scratching outside. I started to cry and covered my mouth with my hand. I just wanted my dad. I wished I could see his face again. The universe, somehow, ironically responded because my dad's face suddenly appeared at one of the windows. He raised his hand and knocked. I stared at him through my eyebrows, my head tilted. Scarcely breathing, I remained still. He kept knocking. That wasn't my dad. The cabin was tied to a tree at around 10 meters from the ground. He could not be at the window. The creature knocked, and for what seemed like an eternity, we just made eye contact. Blood was dripping from one of its nostrils. Another phone call woke me from my trance. Kevin, are you there? Are you in the cabin? Yes, and the thing looks like you, and it's at the window. I'm coming right now. I'll shoot it. Don't worry, I'm just about to turn a corner. Dad, I'm really scared for you. Martin's coming too. It's okay.